our COBT listeners and viewers. We got a packed house today because we've got a cool discussion coming. Let me introduce our guests first. We've got Dr. Rian Bahran. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Reactors. He's part of the U.S. Department of Energy. All of us in energy land have been super excited over the last week or so as 4 companies achieved criticality. And we want to talk with him about what this means, what's the bigger picture. He used a great word as we were talking before we turned the camera on, which is to demystify it a little bit and also put it in context of the overall journey here of bringing nuclear energy back to big prominence here in the U.S. So, Dr. Bahran, thank you so much for joining us. We're elated to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, and as I was telling him, we've got the team came running when we got Dr. Bahran to join us. Mike Bradley is here. We'll talk a hair about the markets. Nick Morris is with us, managing director on the team, 20 years experience at NOV and helped them develop their nuclear strategy. So we're just super excited to have Nick. Have you done a COBT before, Nick?
Maybe the first one.
This is the first one. Wow,
Yeah.
That's huge. Okay. Brett Rampal is with us. He's our Senior Director of Nuclear and Power. And Bill Flores is here. Bill is a forever friend. He's the chairman of ERCOT. He's a senior advisor with us. He is a 10-year U.S. congressman, and he's an energy and power lover. And so we just thought, as I say, Rian, thank you for letting us, not just coming on, but letting us bring the whole family here so that we can talk about everything that's happening in nuclear. It's super exciting.
Like I said, I love the excitement. It's been an incredible week, month, year, and I'm happy to demystify, contextualize, and really happy to get into it. Right, I'm excited for the conversation. I'll try to make sure it is a conversation, so you guys can ask whatever you'd like.
Well, you're too kind, Mike. We always liked having a little bit of market color. Is there anything before we jump in? It's Thursday. It's close of business Thursday.
Yeah, close of business Thursday.
What would you tell us about anything that's happening in the markets right now?
I would say, on close of business Tuesday, a couple days ago, we talked about 3 themes. We talked about the ceasefire ending and oil prices going up. We talked about inflation moving up on that. And we also talked about sector rotation. Since then, you have oil prices, WTI peaked around $75 a barrel. We're down to $72 a barrel. So we're only up $3 since all of this started to occur, which is pretty baffling to us, to be honest with you. Interest rates, you had the 30-year get up to like 5.1%. I think it peaked at like 5.2, 5.3% at the peak of this war. But we're still above 5%. So the markets are still worried about inflation. And the third thing is the sector rotation. We talked about the biggest winners last year being semiconductor stocks, distributed generation, large generation companies, electric related type themes. Semiconductors basically have been smashed. They've come back today a little bit. They're down on average 10%. They were down by 15 to 16% at the low just a couple days ago. And you had a rotation into the Mag 7 stocks. And so the Mag 7 stocks are still outperforming, but that's come back a little bit. So I guess the point would be is there's just a lot of volatility in the markets right now that hasn't, ceased, but, that's interesting. The last thing I would probably want to mention is this, since we're talking about nuclear today, is just maybe give you an idea of like what the SMR stocks have been. You remember those were the hottest stocks in the market. Everyone had to be in them. Everyone had to be in these IPOs. They did fantastically over the 22, 23, 24 timeframe. This year, that group is down on average around 30%. So I think, it's interesting that the reality of how tough this business is going to be, the excitement of the business is there, but the reality of how tough and how long this is going to take, this is going to be a really interesting thing. We're looking forward to talking to our guests today about it.
Awesome. Well, look, let's jump right in. We'll all be jumping in. Rian, I'll try not to drive you too crazy. I just, when I look at your background, which is phenomenal. You worked at Los Alamos. You've worked in the Biden administration, in the White House, the nuclear office. You worked at DOD. You're now at Department of Energy. You've seen this from many angles. I find that to be particularly interesting that you worked in the Biden administration and the Trump administration. This is one of those rare topics where there is plus or minus alignment that the country needs to do that, needs to get nuclear going. Would you mind starting there, just thinking back a little bit on your career, and you've worked on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, that there is this consensus around nuclear that's very helpful and gives us all hope that we're going to get there.
Absolutely. So let me start back for when I was a kid. My dad got a PhD in nuclear physics. This is where my story is a little unoriginal. I have a PhD in nuclear engineering. And so I grew up around radiation symbols and I was excited about science. And, I remember in my first nuclear engineering class, they taught me this is what happens in fission. Here's the particles that come out. And one of the particles was a neutrino. A neutrino is a particle that has no practical applications. It's what my dad studied for 10 years for his PhD. That's the difference between a physicist and an engineer. And I wanted to do applied work, and I was told, get your PhD, and that's how you can really get into positions of technical authority to actually drive nuclear energy. That was my passion. So I went to Los Alamos, which is the premier nuclear laboratory in the United States, right? Manhattan Project. And it was incredible training. A decade of technical work. I was on a team that did critical experiments, not of advanced reactors, but critical experiments from a technical perspective, and just really got my technical chops, if you will. And then somebody said, Rian, you are really good at big picture stuff. You should go to Washington, D.C., and here's an opportunity to go work at the Pentagon in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And so I went for a couple of years, and I actually got to work for the #2 person in the Pentagon, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. And it was an incredible, I joke, it was like a master's degree in bureaucracy. So much scope and incredible to see how actually fast and nimble the Department of War can be, when it needs to on really substantive technical issues, from special operations to space to cyber to nuclear. And so incredible training. And then I was trying to figure out, okay, so now I'm a highly technical person with actually this kind of policy expertise. And so I took that and I went over to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And we tried to drive the nuclear energy agenda and had some successes, good bipartisan support. But I think what's different about this administration, and I joined the Department of Energy in this administration right at the beginning with everybody else, is the unequivocal support for nuclear energy from the administration, from the president to the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Wright, to the Deputy Secretary, to the Assistant Secretary, all the way and across the interagency. It is, when I say unequivocal, we didn't have any executive orders in the last administration. This administration had 4 within the first 5 months. And it just tells you the level of seriousness. It's not just a message or a signal. The executive orders drove implementation at the Department of Energy and other departments. It said, go do X, Y, and Z. One of them is the pilot program, which we'll talk about. But it drove a lot of major activities, things that we could have never imagined, right? The regulatory reform that was needed to enable an ecosystem of innovation. A pilot program that enables companies, instead of waiting for the government to give them funding, to be able to turn on, build hardware, do really hard things to showcase, right, that they have a pathway to commercial viability, direct to the Department of War to establish a program of record, which is for them, that's vernacular for something like a serious program, real dollars. We tried to push that in the last administration, and, the Department of War was generally supportive. They said, look, we could use nuclear reactors for resilient energy. But then when it was a matter of budgeting for it, the services would always budget for an airplane over premium resilience. And so in this administration, the executive order directed the Army to establish a program of record. We will have reactors deployed at military installations this decade. So a lot more actions. I'm happy to get into it a little bit more, but that's what this administration provided. And so then being at the Department of Energy and having the authority and the support from our political leadership to just go and execute. Everybody was aligned, including industry. So unequivocal support, industry willing to do things differently, to be innovative, to be agile, not just startups. They put the pressure on the incumbents to try to actually show up for this moment. And then finally, the demand, right? That's something that I know you all talk about often in your podcast. Everybody knows about the demand, all partially driven by AI. So that confluence has made it where I feel like the progress we've had in the past year is more than I've accomplished in my entire career, 100x. And that's why when people talk about a nuclear renaissance, which is a word that was used, I graduated in 06, Maynard. they talked about a renaissance then. That's when I got my nuclear engineering degree, and it never happened. People are using that word, and many of us, my colleague Rachel Slaybaugh just published a piece yesterday. I mean, we were initially scared of that word, but now we feel it, we believe it. I used to say tipping point, but it's just incredible to see government enabling industry and how that's had a tangible effect on unlocking this technology.
I'm curious, as you described how things have changed here in this administration, not to ask sort of a nerdy structural question, but is the role of the energy dominance group, is that what is making this more cohesive, or has that been pivotal, or is it really just, as you say, key leadership is so on board and that's what's making it happen? I'm just wondering why it's happened and how we keep it.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think structurally, number one, the nuclear energy policy, typically, it goes from OSTP or the National Security Council and NEDC. Things usually come from kind of the ground up. In this administration, it came from the top down. It came from the president's deputy chief of staff for policy, from that office, and then brought together OSTP, NSC, NEDC, the Department of Energy, and so it just helps that this administration is actually running its nuclear policy from above the policy components. So that's the structural difference. And that's what enabled 4 executive orders that directed implementation immediately. And we've been sprinting and we've been executing. And I think the beautiful thing is that the proof is in the pudding, right? The results, the headlines, it's not just the criticalities, right? There's a headline coming out of government working with industry every single week with gigawatt scale, SMRs, micros, the fuel cycle. Things are truly moving.
Maybe that can be our sort of next line of questioning, which is, as you think big picture about, we want to get nuclear going again. Well, there's so many pieces to that. We want to build more big ones. We want to innovate and build more, quote, smaller ones. We've got a supply chain for both of those. We have an AI race that is on, so speed is another component to this whole thing. Like, how do you, as you attack the complex, what do you prioritize? How do you think about? It seems like we're pushing everything as fast as we can, but is there a pecking order? Is there a way to do this that ensures success more than another sequence? Like, how do you think about attacking that whole complex?
So it's a great question. I think the executive order gave us a North Star of 400 gigawatts by 2050, and so that means that we need gigawatt scale, we need SMRs, Gen 3 plus Gen 4, we need micro reactors, and so we have to use a football analogy, since it's World Cup time. Our approach has been to take a lot of shots on goal, and similar to soccer, shots on goal do directly correlate to goals, and we've seen these with the criticalities. So let me talk a little bit about the shots on goal. I'll start with gigawatt scale. And, I oversee all of the nuclear reactor work in the department, except for the work under the energy dominance financing, the loan work. They had a $17.5 billion conditional commitment, to really try to drive and accelerate the deployment of gigawatt scale reactors. So they've really been leading the way on gigawatt scale. Although I will tell you, Julie Kozaraki, who works there, who's a good friend of ours and your podcast, although they're always focused on large scale reactors, she came out to Idaho National Laboratory maybe 2 weeks ago and saw all these criticalities, and she's now warmed up to the concept of micros, because I think for her, losing the economies of scale was hard for her to understand. Why is that? Why should we be doing that? And then when she saw the hardware that was being built and tested, she's been really, really kind of more open to advanced SMR, specifically micros. I think my joke has been, 4 reactors, micro reactors went critical, and Julie Kozaraki went less critical of micro reactors as a concept. So I think our approach is, we have those big plays on the gigawatt scales. For SMRs, the Gen 3 plus and Gen 4, the kind of 300 megawatt range, we have some major DOE investments. We awarded $400 million to TVA and GE for deployment of the BD X300 at Clinch River site in Tennessee. And you've seen some follow-on announcements from Commerce about, fleet mode deployment of those reactors, including in Tennessee and Alabama. We've done the same with Holtec. We continue to support the advanced reactor demonstration programs, X Energy, TerraPower, Kairos. there's been headlines associated with some of their technical and regulatory milestones. So a lot of big government investments there, and not just on the reactor side, on the fuel cycle side of the house. And then finally, on the microreactors, it's been really exciting. We built this reactor pilot program with the goal of, how do we incentivize industry to be able to inject the private capital needed for companies that have these small reactor concepts that could be scaled? How do you get that private capital to those companies? And the answer was pretty simple: provide a regulatory pathway that allows them to test and build hardware not in years, but in months. And we were able to do that. And I'm happy to talk more about that program. That's been such an incredibly successful. I talk about shots on goal and points on the board. The criticalities, not only the historic in nature, because we turned on 4 advanced reactor concepts within a month, and that's never happened anywhere in the world ever, right? Not even China. The first one that turned on was the first non-light water reactor that we've turned on that's privately funded in over 40 years. So the history, and some may say, well, we had criticality tests. Enrico Fermi stacked some graphite and uranium in the 50s. And that's true. And that proved the technical viability of nuclear fission. But it didn't prove the commercial viability, because we went from Fermi stacking his pile to submarines. And I love submarines. I spent a lot of my career supporting naval reactors early on as part of my technical work for my PhD. But when people ask about, well, why not just take submarines and that should be your basis for SMRs? I say, we're not trying to make Batmobiles. We're trying to make Jeep Cherokees in terms of cost and exquisite capability. So, I'm really excited that now we have companies that have been able to unlock capital to demonstrate the ability to build hardware. And to use another American football analogy, we know that these criticalities of these concepts, historic, but it's still not the end zone. We've been able to allow companies to go from, to the 20 or 30 or 40-yard line within months, but you still have to get to commercial viability. And the companies get to decide what type of prototype, how early they want to move. Do you want to go with power? Do you want to do a zero power? All of that is technical details. The real punchline, and this is the real unlock, is the ability to build nuclear hardware and demonstrate the competencies that are needed to get to any type of commercial prototype on your way to a final commercial product. That unlock has been not just incredible for the companies involved, for the companies that are going to turn on, because there's more coming, but then for the customers, the Department of War that wants these deployed this decade as directed by the executive order. For your community, including oil and gas, other industrial processes, data centers, right? We're providing a pathway where it doesn't have to be years and you're just doing paperwork.
Can I ask you, I was thinking of a couple of things that always come up in nuclear, particularly in the community of the people that love nuclear, but it's not their first language.
Oh.
They're always stunned by the number of new nuclear companies. Like, wow, there's all these guys. And people say, I'm trying to sort these guys out. You get that comment. And then the second comment you always get is timing. Like, when does it get here? How do you see these criticality tests sort of helping sort out, the number of new nuclear companies we have? Like, is it creating champions that will ultimately get there sooner? I know you don't want to pick favorites, but I'm just saying, how does it affect the landscape, and then how do you see it affecting the ultimate timing?
I get that question a lot. I mean, I usually get the higher order question, which is, what is the state of nuclear energy? And to quote Deputy Secretary Danley's joke, his answer was Idaho, because of the criticalities that were there. But in reality, I think the way I try to think about this is I tier the different reactor concepts into different sizes. And so gigawatt scale, right? We already have a winner. Then you have advanced reactor SMRs on a kind of 300 megawatt scale between the Gen 4 and Gen 3 plus. There's less than double-digit companies there, right? So there's quite a few companies, including some that we've been working with, companies that we've worked in the past. So it's not a huge number.
Yeah.
And those companies are, really trying to unlock order books. In the case of Gen 3 plus, since it's just a shrunken version of the current fleet, they have mature supply chains. They're making great progress, not just the companies that we've awarded, but others. In terms of the Gen 4 advanced reactor concepts, they provide not just electricity, but other versatile attributes, right? Process heat. And so you see this with X Energy working with Dow, TerraPower, with their ability to provide storage as well as a sodium cooled fast reactor. And so, so the versatility of these advanced reactor concepts, it's not, there's not 100 of those concepts where you start seeing, and then let's jump back to the microreactor side of the house, where there's quite a few in our reactor pilot program, and then the Department of War is down selecting, and I think we're going to start to see the customers starting to make decisions on where do they want to see an order book of each of these tiers. On micros is where we start to see a big number, but then you can break that, from my mind, into two tiers: the kind of small, 1 to 5 megawatt range versus the tens of megawatts, and they just target different initial early off takers. So the kind of 1 to 5 megawatt, the military is really interested because that's about the size of energy for the base. The folks that are targeting the 10 to 50 megawatts are looking really for data centers, and then everybody hopes oil and gas will be fast followers, that international countries will be fast followers. And I think in that case, it's really still wide open. I mentioned the football analogy. I mean, everybody's still on the 20, 30, 40-yard line. And, is it going to be faster for the companies that are targeting a 50 megawatt range solution for a data center? Will they be able to mature their commercially viable design? Or will the companies that are kind of in the 1 to 5 megawatt range get a customer base from the DOW and then try to scale that and try to leapfrog? And so it's kind of wide open. It's been fun to enable everybody. And I think at the end of the day, the Department of Energy's perspective is, let's let the market pick. Let's create an ecosystem where, companies can come in, by the way, not just on the reactor side of the house, but also on the fuel cycle side of the house. They see regulatory clarity and a timeline to build hardware in months, not years, to build these prototypes. And they have a clear view of, if I can do that, I can unlock the investments and I can get to commercialization and I can solve some of these challenges.
Bill, can I grab you just because Rian's talked about the momentum continuing to build here and how Washington is pushing all this. Any impressions you'd share or questions you might have for Rian that come from your background? Because this is a national objective, and we're very serious about it.
He's answered my questions about going from criticality to commerciality to scale, and the path that looks like. He's also talked about how are we going to ultimately standardize on particular designs in each one of those size categories. My question as a former policymaker comes up about the NRC. One of the things that the administration did to help jumpstart this industry is to his executive orders that you talked about in the first 4 months of the administration. Ultimately, the NRC is going to be involved again. And I just wondered if you feel comfortable answering this question. You may not, but if you feel comfortable, what reforms are needed at the NRC in order to help keep all of this trajectory on track?
It's a great question. One of the good things about this moment is that if you ask the industry, how do you feel about the NRC? You will generally get extremely positive feedback about their timelines, whether it's related to small reactors, larger reactors. NRC, just within our portfolio, I mean, they awarded the first ever, Category 2 license to a TRISO fuel fabrication facility. Now, it's pretty wonky, but the first ever word is really the piece that you should be paying attention to. Same thing, the first ever construction permit for a Generation 4 advanced reactor. So we're seeing first ever, and we're seeing at a timeline that is not just fast, but there's certainty there. And so a lot of that was directed by the executive order. One of the things that's plagued this community is the lack of certainty on regulatory timeline. If I get into this business, am I just going to do paperwork forever? And so both NRC and DOE, we do it for different purposes, right? We are saying, look, through our programs, and we've after the reactor pilot program, we're now memorializing this effort in something called Launchpad. So if you have a concept, let's just say something like conversion or recycling or fuel fabrication. And instead of trying to find government funding, you can come in and build hardware through our process, and we give you certainty that it's going to be months, not years. And that's enough to do two things: unlock the private capital needed to mature to a commercial product. But then number two, and this is really to the point that you're asking about, we've built this program as a fast track to a commercial license, which means it's not just we're taking advantage of NRC's already increased expediency and their kind of alignment to support not just safety and security, but you'll hear the chairman of the NRC talk about shovels in the ground being their highest priority after safety and security. But in addition to that, we are trying to do a crosswalk between if you have gone through our authorization process, and we say, these words are wonky, so maybe for your viewers, we say authorization, NRC says licensing, actually Department of War says permitting. It's all the same thing, right? You need somebody to say you're allowed to turn on this nuclear facility. If you do it under us, we've had the NRC be part of the reviews of all of these processes. We've also, with the NRC, signed an addendum to our memorandum of understanding that says, here's how we're going to collaborate. And here's how the companies that are going to look to get a commercial license, here's how they're going to take advantage of not just the data that they gained from these experiments, but also if there's kind of safety and security analysis and oversight work that we've done in the Department of Energy for them to benefit from that as well. So we've at least agreed, and this was directed specifically in the executive order for them not to be duplicative. So we've agreed to work together to figure out where that overlap is. They understand our processes, and they have directed their staff to better understand how to take advantage of our work. It is different, right? We have different names for the different steps. They're not exactly aligned, but substantively, we also hold the highest standards of safety and security as they progress through our processes. And then the last thing is, in addition to figuring out how to take advantage of some of the work that we've done, they have done draft rulemaking to codify this, to make this an enduring, clear handoff. And all of this, when you tie a bow on it, what does it turn into? Regulatory certainty for this community, still with the highest standards of safety and security, but regulatory certainty for our industry.
Well, that's pretty exciting. I didn't realize that was going on in the background. That's good to hear that DOE and NRC are working together so closely. Maynard, can I ask one more question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. My next question is, you touched on fuel a couple of times. And my question is this: what are the next steps with fuel? You've got these new technology reactors. The fuel requirements are different, but you've got fuel. The companies that build the fuel are going to say, well, we need to have a market for it before we're going to invest in the fuel supply chain. What is it going to take to bring all those pieces together?
So it's a great question. I think maybe 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago, what kept me up at night was the fuel supply. You can't have energy security without fuel. So let's talk about the broader fuel cycle. And by the way, I'm just the reactor guy. So there's another deputy assistant secretary for fuel, but I'm the consumer here. And so I follow his activities closely. So what have we done to ensure that these reactors will have an adequate supply of fuel, especially as we target 400 gigawatts? The first thing that we did is this administration put out $2.7 billion in funding for enrichment to get to enriched uranium, both for low enriched uranium, which is what goes into the current fleet, into some of the SMRs, into a small subset of the micros. And then out of that 2.7 billion, about 1.8 billion went to high assay low enriched uranium. So if I make reactors smaller, I often need a higher uranium density, which is this high assay low enriched uranium. It's 20%, 19.75% of enrichment.
HALEU.
So HALEU, that's right. So for HALEU, we didn't have a domestic supply. Russia was the sole supplier. And so there's a prohibition on, getting HALEU from Russia that gets enacted in a couple of years. And so what we've done is we've put out, this funding to help solve that supply chain on the enrichment side. So while that is happening, we're also trying to figure out, how about the rest of it? How about conversion, and how about fuel fabrication, right? Enrichment helps everybody, but you still have the other steps. The challenge is, different reactors use different fuel types. So it's not like I can solve, fuel fabrication by just investing in TRISO, which is a specific type of fuel, or by investing in metallic, uranium fuel. So instead, what we've done is actually through the fuel pilot program and through Launchpad, we're providing the same service to those fuel cycle facilities on the fabrication side of the house that they can apply and get through these milestones, unlock their own private capital to help solve that gap. Same thing for conversion, same thing for recycling, right? This administration has made it clear that, we've changed our policy on recycling. And we do think that advanced fuel forms of different types, including plutonium, do provide a glide path to energy security. So those have been some of our actions. And we haven't stopped there on the front end. There's been incredible work also by my colleagues and by the administration and our senior political leadership on the back end. And so you may have read about the nuclear life cycle innovation campuses, which has just been one of the highest impacts by my measure activities out of this administration for nuclear, because although we're helping accelerate momentum on reactor deployment, we're taking something that had some momentum and hitting it 100x. With nuclear fuel disposition, there's been zero movement. And so this nuclear life cycle innovation campuses, the premise is quite simple. Used nuclear fuel is still an asset. It may be a liability to some, but as a nuclear engineer, and I'll tell you, 10 out of 10 nuclear engineers love reprocessing. And I think it's because in our first nuclear engineering class, we're told, here's what a reactor is, here's what goes in, here's what goes out, and here's how much energy is still in there. And for the rest of our careers, we're just really excited about, the prospect of recycling. And so what this administration has done is said, look, that's still an asset. And so an industry is willing to jump in and take advantage of that asset and provide not just the ability to recycle, but produce fuel that goes into reactors that powers things like data centers. And you can all do that co-located.
Mhm.
You think about the economic prosperity of that unlock, for different states is huge. And so what we did is we released an RFI, asking states to potentially raise their hands to see if they wanted to sign up for that ecosystem, including the disposition piece and to a deep geologic repository, which is, at least the science is pretty sound there. And we've gotten incredible responses. States raising their hands, multiple states raising their hand. I think over 20 states provided positive responses. Incredible. I mean, we've really broken that logjam. So that's how we're thinking about the entire fuel cycle and the energy security associated with making sure that we do have a glide path for how we fuel these advanced reactor concepts in the future.
Let me throw one more at you. You used the expression economic development, Rian, and I was curious about, so much of this is we need power, we need reliable baseload power, we got to win the AI race. There's so much at stake here. And of course, you want something that's environmentally friendly. If the US develops particularly this micro reactor industry, which you'll know better than us, but the US seems particularly focused on it. If we do that, how do you think about that in terms of the country's economic, sort of competitive advantage? It just seems like a game changer if the US actually creates this industry, creates really viable companies that can do this. Ultimately, it's reasonably cost effective, and suddenly you have this power capability. And I haven't even touched on the military advantages if you have that type of thing. It just seems, can you talk to us about how in the halls of power this potential is discussed and what it could mean for the country?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you didn't even touch on space, by the way, which,
There you go.
for microreactor,
go.
this administration has the goal is to put a space reactor by 2028, which is a mission to Mars. We haven't done that in also over 40 years, and to put a reactor on the moon around 2030. So ambitious goals on the space side of the house. The way I see it, and the way I think this will hopefully make sense to you and your listeners. We have pretty major gigawatt targets, so we really do need to unlock the gigawatt scale and the larger scale SMRs. And if we can really mature microreactor concepts to the point where we can really have energy generation, even if it's 1, 10, 20 megawatts at a time, 5 megawatts at a time, if you can really factory produce these and produce, not just 5 a year, not just 10 a year, 100 a year, 1,000 a year, you can imagine how that's going to change the game for utilities. It's going to change the game for oil and gas. I mean, it's going to change the way we think about even powering the AI revolution, right? Federated data centers are going to be important for inference and training. And so, we're early in the game, right? This is really a marathon and it's not a sprint. But I think the unlock for how to take advantage of energy generation that's resilient, reliable, and if you can get the commercial viability and the speed, I think it's almost really hard for us to imagine what that could look like, but you can imagine the economic prosperity there. And then separately, that's just us in the United States. We have had countries, the phone has been ringing off the hook, as they say, from every country that wants to understand. We're hearing about these criticalities of these microreactors, countries that may want to jump into a nuclear journey but haven't figured out the financing for a 5 or 10 or $15 billion asset, but certainly see the value of, well, if it doesn't have to be $1 billion and I can buy some microreactors, maybe that's a way for me to get into the game. Maybe that's a way for me to power some of my resilient critical nodes, maybe their military bases. So the potential unlock on the international export game, and being able to provide, again, similarly solutions for countries. I mean, you can imagine we can go so many ways here. Yeah.
So just to clarify, because it feels like the U.S., maybe not uniquely, but it seems like as a country, we're really focused on this. I'm curious, is China, are they in Europe? Like, are there other parts of the world that are as focused on micro as we are?
They are not. I think, part of it is we win on innovation 10 out of 10 times. And, to really get to the commercial viability of a microreactor, right? I'm going from a gigawatt to maybe a megawatt. So I'm losing 3 orders of magnitude of economies of scale. So to get to that kind of factory fabricated, commercially viable product, right? We're still on the 20, 30-yard line, but we can probably get there within a few years, right? The hope for most of these companies is within a year, electricity, and then within a year deployment. And so as early as 2028 and maybe spread out into the late into the decade. So, right, most countries are focused on gigawatt scale or larger scale to meet their energy needs, and so are we. I think the only difference is because of how innovative our system is, because of how incredible our regulatory ecosystem is today. You can just move faster with micros, right? You can just build them faster. The overnight capital costs are lower. And so we're just seeing a sprint, and we're seeing points on the board that's creating momentum for all of the technologies. And so I think that's why you'll see the Department of Energy, we are just as focused on the gigawatt scale, just as focused on the larger pieces. We're just seeing points on the board that are capturing the attention of everybody, right? That, as the microreactors try to really compete for, getting utilities to pay attention to them, which they may, right? If I can get these at 1,000 or a couple hundred out a year, maybe utilities that are going to really look at just cost per megawatt hour, I might start to be cost competitive. But in the meantime, I'm showing everybody that this doesn't have to be slow, right? That this doesn't have to be over budget, over cost, right? And it's I think lifting everybody despite our need for focusing on the larger concepts.
Rian, thanks for being here with us. It's awesome to hear you talk about this. I'm a student of history with the nuke industry. What's happened at the labs in the last 70 years, we stand on the shoulders of giants. The testing era that happened out in Idaho, it's like it's back now. We're doing it again. We're starting this experiments up in a big way, and that's awesome. But like, take us to sort of like, what are the next steps with these 4? And there's a couple of more. It sounds like they're going to go critical here in the next few months. You mentioned like, this is we're on the 20-yard line with where, in terms of like development to a product that's going to run an anger and generate economic electrons. But what do the next 70 yards look like? And I guess maybe to frame it in 2 ways, like, are the private markets going to be able to fund this to commercialization? Or will they need continued support in y'all's estimation? And then just kind of tell us, where does the lab and the DOE specifically continue to help these companies moving forward? And I don't mean to constrain your answer, but just help us with what happens for the next 70, 80 yards for these companies to get to commercialization.
Sure, yeah. I'll say the Department of Energy and the national laboratories, we've helped in 2 ways. So we stood up a program that really has this enabling ecosystem, not just on the regulatory pathway and certainty, but we also stood up what we call the concierge team, which is, how do we knock away roadblocks, not safety roadblocks, but, if you, something that might take 2 months because of the bureaucracy. How do we get it done in 2 days, right? That can really enable companies to work well with the Department of Energy. And then Idaho National Laboratory, and actually all the national laboratories, have lended their technical expertise to all the companies that are in our program. And that includes not just technical support, but operational expertise. And that's been incredibly helpful. So I think we're going to continue to do both of those things. So what does it take? What does it take for these companies to go from the 20-yard line to the end zone? I'll start off with a lot of humility, which is nobody knows, right? This is the beauty of the reactor pilot program, or just our industry, which is there's no right or wrong answer. How do I get to a commercially viable factory fabricated SMR and microreactor? I can try to just jump to the commercial product, and we have programs that do that. Or I can try to kind of iterate X amount of prototypes. And it depends on your design. It depends on how much you're trying to prove out. If it's a really advanced reactor concept, let's say a molten salt reactor, those weren't going to turn on in the first few months, right? Those still need some time to not just kind of mature their kind of safety basis for their designs, but even on the fuel fabrication side of the house. There's nobody that's making fuels this moment for molten salt reactors. So some of this is, if you're a company, you're trying to think about, okay, at what point do I turn on a prototype? I know that the Department of Energy offers me months, not years. And so, do I aim for the 20-yard line? Do I throw a long pass to the 40-yard line? Do I try to go to the 60-yard line? And then how quickly do I want to keep iterating? Because what are you trying to balance? Both speed to be able to demonstrate the technical maturity and the progress, to unlock the capital and the piece. But you're also trying to optimize for cost and the commercial viability piece. And so that's why I have enough humility to say, I don't know what the right answer is, right? I don't know. All we can do is create an ecosystem, for companies to start competing, and it'll be interesting to see what they choose to do. And we're going to support them every part of the way.
Dr. Bahran, I'm curious, your thoughts. I think many think this is a fantastic accomplishment that many of the companies have been going forward and that your program is fostering. But we've also seen a little bit of criticism throughout the community, from outside the community. How do you respond more broadly to the to the criticism around hype and, real progress here? And just curious, has there been one form of criticism that you thought was particularly egregious or ridiculous around this discussion here that you'd highlight to say, this is not the way this program has been working?
I've seen overwhelming support. I try to Google this program, and try to really get a sense of what is the community feeling, whether it's media, our own technical and nuclear community, even the forums. And it's really generally been overwhelmingly positive, Brett. People just are excited about, headlines that are historic and not wonky. I mean, nuclear is a bipartisan issue, so that helps, but also just the fact that, these companies are building hardware. I think it's captured everybody's excitement. I think where the criticism is, I'll say fair, is, we still, the pilot program has not solved for getting energy and kind of electricity on the grid, right? We still need to hit 400 gigawatts by 2050. And so if I'm doing the math, I probably need something like 50 gigawatts by 2035. And so this program, is not moving the needle on gigawatts by 2035. But what it does is it puts us on a glide path, for not just creating momentum, for allowing microreactors to eventually contribute to gigawatts on the grid and unlocking all these different applications. But we still have to get gigawatts on the grid this decade and next decade. And so that's where the department, I mentioned some of the activities on the gigawatt scale. I mentioned some of our SMR investments, but we're also trying to squeeze more out of the current fleet. We launched the Uprise initiative, which is really, we believe that uprates and restarts they are the low-hanging fruit into the fastest way to get nuclear energy capacity on the grid. So we launched an initiative that tries to take all the techno-economic analysis and work that we've done, working with industry, working with the NRC, to try to figure out how do we accelerate and hit targets that actually the executive order gave us, which was 5 gigawatts by 2030. DOE said we're going to try to get up to 5 gigawatts by 2029 of uprates and restarts. And Brett, yesterday I had a student reach out to me that I was connected to through a friend, and he said, I see all the stuff that you do, how do I work on uprise? Because, truly as a, you can imagine when you were a student, in the early 2000s, you were a true believer, and the fastest way for gigawatts on the grid is uprates. There's no doubt about it. So, we've really approached this holistically, and I think that criticism is born out of, people on the outside mistakenly thinking that this is all we're focused on. We're very proud of this, but we are equally focused on everything that it takes to meet the president's executive order. So, I think folks on the minority of folks that are criticizing us, they also, I will say, maybe have a lack of imagination. They do think, that getting onto the, if you're on the 20-yard line with a microreactor, how does this really get you to an end zone where you can get a commercially viable product when you lose the economies of scale? And I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of Michael Crichton and the movie Jurassic Park and the book Jurassic Park. And there's a scene in Jurassic Park where, they talk about, well, here's, there's a mosquito and it got stuck in the amber, and then we were able to extract some old, blood from a dinosaur, and then, we added some frog DNA, and then voila, we had velociraptors in, in 1992 and in 1994 and in 2002 and 2005. I mean, they made a lot of movies, but the point being, with Crichton and that book, I mean, there's a little bit of a leap of faith that you have to take. And to me, the frog DNA, that is the innovation that I think our ecosystem, I don't mean the nuclear ecosystem, the United States, $1 trillion innovative ecosystem that brought us the SpaceXs of the world. I mean, that is what is happening. And so I think some of them just lack the imagination and the ability to make that leap of faith. Is, yeah, we're still on the 20-yard line, but I believe in America, and I believe in innovation, and I believe that we can get there.
Beyond, when you go through that, as you said, you guys are pursuing all of this at the same time. It's not like focusing on micro reactor development is taking away from what we're doing with gigawatt scale. I mean, we're pursuing all of it. So don't think we're distracted. We're doing it all.
Exactly. I'll tell you, we had an uprise event at the White House. We had Deputy Secretary Danley there. We had Emily Underwood, who works in the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy's office from the White House. We had Ethan Klein from OSTP, who's the highest ranking nuclear engineer in the history of the White House, who's the Chief Technology Officer of the United States. We had Assistant Secretary Ted Garish, Assistant Secretary Audrey Robertson. I mean, we had Undersecretary of Energy Kyle. I mean, we had, just shows you the government's commitment, just the nuclear energy capacity expansion of uprates, right? Just something that was so wonky that kind of lives with utilities. I mean, that's how focused we are as an administration. That's the unequivocal support that I was mentioning before.
Do you mind? I mean, I think a lot of people understand uprates, but it's only a couple of years ago that I really understood what folks were talking about here. But basically, just getting more out of what we have. But can you shed a little more light on uprate technology, how it's changing? What we could expect in terms of the potential of this. It's a very interesting, and I feel like under-discussed piece of the nuclear expansion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think as we were building this initiative, we also wanted to demystify uprates, because I think we can say at a high level, right, I'm trying to get more juice out of the current fleets. But for many people, they don't understand, what does that mean? Like, why is there still juice? And I think what we try to explain to people is, two things. Number one, there's been some tremendous innovation on advanced fuel forms where, by just changing the type of fuel that I have in the current fleet, I can get a lot more. We call these super uprates. And this is really the 2030s is when we expect that to happen. So, when I talk about uprates, I'm talking about how do I change things associated with a nuclear reactor, whether it's the fuel, parts of the core, or even the balance of plant, the other stuff. How do I have upgrades there that will allow us to get more energy and capacity out? So I mentioned fuel, and we've been working on this for years. Brett knows this topic really, really well, and we expect there to be many gigawatts in the 2030s on the fuel side. But in this decade, there are things that we can do that some of them, by the way, require, because it's part of the safety system, they require going through the NRC, and the NRC is committed to doing this quickly. Actually, the chairman of the NRC was also at that event and spoke on Bloomberg right after. So think of it as I'm providing changes or upgrades to parts of the safety, parts of the reactor or parts of the balance of plant. And you can imagine that, by being able to either upgrade the equipment or through kind of more risk-informed approaches that we believe that there's more margin, so I can operate in a different way to get me more energy. So the national labs working with industry, we've actually quantified this down to the megawatt almost, right? We know every single reactor, and we have a plot that says, look, if I do X, Y, Z, this is how much I can get out, and here's how much it's going to cost. And the real push for acceleration is, instead of waiting and kind of taking your time to figure out whether you want to do the investment necessary, if you want to, do the outage, if you need to turn off the reactor, which does cost you money to be able to do these upgrades. We've done all that techno-economic analysis, and at the department, working with the White House, we're willing to work and try to find off-takers, including hyperscalers, to pay for it. So it's really, it's not a new concept, but because of the incessant demand from hyperscalers for energy, we think there's a great matchmaking opportunity here. And the basis of it is this techno-economic analysis that we've done.
Yeah, Rian, I think we can all agree that there's a lot of enthusiasm for nuclear right now. But I can remember it wasn't too long ago when we were thinking about shutting down nuclear plants here in the U.S. and then we basically got into this low carbon mindset, and so we got the public back. And now affordability is the biggest issue. It's not a low carbon issue. I guess my question is what concerns you or scares you the most about this enthusiasm? Is it political? Is it an incident? What is it that kind of keeps you up at night?
The only thing that keeps me up at night at this point is workforce. I will tell you, I do think that we're at the point of where we have had irreversible implementation of the president's executive orders. So I think for years I've been saying we're at a tipping point. I think we've tipped, and so I am not concerned. I think public acceptance. I think our industry, from soup to nuts, is ready to meet this moment. And we are going to get to commercially viable products across the size ranges that I mentioned with different attributes. So I'm not concerned about any nuclear accidents or incidents. I think the safety is not only at the highest standards, we now have innovative designs that just have even higher safety margins. I think what concerns me is the workforce. We do hear that you think about long lead items, the people are a long lead item in some way. And when we talk to electricians, when we talk to some of the trades, they all tell us we need a couple years to stand up, the programs needed to ensure that you have the right personnel at the location that you need. So you need to tell us where the reactors are. And we're not exactly there yet. And so that's something that keeps me up. We do have a whole government effort here. And the real answer here is to unlock the order books and start to, get everybody to agree we're going to deploy this type of reactor here. And really, at some point, this will solve itself. But in the meantime, I think we're fine on nuclear engineers. I'm a nuclear engineer. DOE has been funding programs, continues to, incredible programs in the United States. But the trades, the electricians and the welders and the folks that have opportunities to go work on data centers and not have to travel, I think that's the biggest risk in my mind.
I was wondering, Rian, and people are a long lead item. That quote of yours, that was a really good one. But in your background, particularly when you were at DOD, you were helping, or DOW, sorry, you were helping the department think about all the angles around nuclear, including deterrence and basically obviously the Iran war is about the spread of nuclear capability. As we push all of this nuclear, it's always on people's minds. Are we going to develop technology that the wrong people get? Are we going to make things less safe? Like what, for years that held back the advancement of nuclear at some level. How do you think about all of this nuclear renaissance, against the backdrop of, nuclear deterrence?
It's a great question. And I'll say, when I was at the Pentagon, I got to both work on how do we think about nuclear technology as it relates to how the Department of War could take advantage of this incredible energy source. And again, I mentioned not Batmobiles, right? I mean, submarines cost a lot of money, but if we have a product that is, I won't say commercially viable, but at least not prohibitively costly, to enable things like keeping the lights on a bad day at Fort Bragg, right? Keeping the lights on a bad day at any military facility where, they have an important operational mission that you just, and I say bad day, it could be a cyber attack, it could be a bio attack, right? Something where, the grid goes down. The beauty of microreactors specifically is that they don't have to be refueled for years, unlike backup diesel generators, right? So you go from weeks of resiliency to years immediately. And so, so incredible use cases on the resilient side of the house, incredible use cases on the operational, even forward deployed side of the house, including in space. So a lot of excitement from the Department of War, and I'm glad that they're hyper focused on I'm just going to provide resilient power for energy installations, because that has the most kind of one-to-one supports the commercial side of this, right? It's just a reactor that's powering a base in the same way they would power a data center. And so the use cases make sense. And on your question about how does it fit within the backdrop of how we've thought about nuclear nonproliferation historically? So we don't do that in my office, but I will say we have, as a nation, a pretty robust nonproliferation approach and regime as codified in law. And so there are export control rules for these technologies. We have to have specific bilateral cooperative agreements. These are, you might have heard them as the 1, 2, 3 agreements. And my colleagues at the National Nuclear Security Administration and my colleagues at the State Department, they all have the lead, and it is their job to ensure that while we in the Office of Nuclear Energy are pushing the promote, that we are equally adhering to the protect. But their commitment in this administration has been, we will do that without, really putting a chokehold on innovation and the ability to really allow this market to thrive. So I think we're striking a great balance in this administration. And I think that will continue because of the, not just economic prosperity, the affordability for Americans that this unlocks, but also the ability to power AI and continue to win that race, the ability to crowd out Russia and China on the export market, which is a nonproliferation imperative, right? One of the best ways, to ensure that there is nonproliferation, that the high standards of safety, security, and nonproliferation are adhered to internationally, is to have U.S. technology where it's baked in, and we work very closely with the NNSA to make sure that our companies that we support are getting their help on things like safeguards and security early in the design phase, so that when we go to other countries, we can say, look, U.S. technology is safer, it's more secure, it's more safeguardable. So I think it's just, I think we found a really good balance in this administration. I think that'll continue because at the end of the day, both nonproliferation objectives are being met by reestablishing U.S. leadership in this sector. And then at the same vein, we are really advancing at a pace where, this technology will provide energy security for us and our allies and partners.
Well, I'm just looking up. We're coming up on time, Rian. You covered the waterfront of the things that are on our mind. Was there, as you reflect on it, was there something that is important in all this, whether it's money, regulatory, supply chain, anything at all, AI? Is there any piece of this that's important that we didn't touch on? Because I think all of us out here are watching this. We're excited about it. We're wondering what we're missing, et cetera. But anything as you reflect that we should have touched on?
Just one, which is I am equally excited about not just nuclear energy to power AI, but AI to accelerate the deployment of nuclear energy.
Yeah.
So I don't know about you, but I'm a power user of these frontier models.
Yeah.
And they're truly incredible. And so one thing that I did a year ago is establish an AI for nuclear deployment initiative. And it was really simple. I looked around industry. Everybody said they were doing AI, and I think they were using some form of co-pilot for like a small uplift. That's fine. I really believe in the power of AI and frontier models and this kind of supercomputer revolution to really accelerate how we do nuclear deployment. And I thought the best way to do that is to have a focused initiative. And then separately, we got direction from the president to actually what is called the Genesis mission, which is to, Rian's words, get serious about AI for at least 20 challenges of national importance that are of science and technology. So that includes fission, fusion, quite a few different ones. So we have this whole initiative now that's a huge priority for the president and the administration. Dario Gil is the undersecretary who's lead for it. And in the nuclear field, we were ready because we already had an idea of, okay, what is that actually going to look like? We don't want to just talk about AI to accelerate deployment. Let's come up with a plan. And so we said, if we can get agentized workflows to really change the game on how we do design, licensing, manufacturing, construction, and autonomous operation. So agentized workflows that are revolutionizing how we do each of those, and then they're working together. Can we have, targets like, let's reduce the cost of nuclear deployment by 50% in the next 5 years? Can we increase the timeline or reduce the timeline of nuclear deployment by 50%, right? Like ambitious goals that could be enabled by this technology. And we decided that if we can really get partnerships with industry, both reactor companies, hyperscalers, and really focus, I think we have a shot. And we're lucky that we're nested under the Genesis mission, because the Genesis mission, its tagline is, we want to double the productivity of science and engineering in the United States in a decade, working with industry. So that's our plan, that's our focus. And it's been incredible working with Idaho National Laboratory, Argonne, Oak Ridge, and then companies to really put meat to that bone. How do we actually do this? We've even seen, you might have seen some of the headlines, we've done this, on licensing, we worked with a company to take something that takes 6 weeks and turn it into a few hours. On manufacturing, we worked with a company to take, from an AI concept to a manufactured part that went into one of our reactors that we turned on as part of the pilot program in weeks. And so just small efforts to show that this could be a game changer. But what if we really do this in a serious way? So I'm really excited about this effort. We're probably going to be announcing, we put out a request for applications with funding on this. And so it's just an area that I think you and your listeners should pay attention to, because it's not a slam dunk, but it's the right thing to do, and it has the potential to really help further, this tipping point of nuclear deployment.
I was just listening to you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like of all these amazing stops you've had in your career, you got to be having the most fun and working harder than you've ever. I mean, it just seems like fantastic.
Maynard, it is incredible. This is the best job I've ever had by far. It's the best leadership I've ever had all the way to the top. It's the best partnerships. I work with folks. This is not just me, just so you know, there's been a handful of folks across DOE that have enabled all this work. I'm just lucky to be in the position where I get to be involved and push. And what it feels like to me is, if you ever tried one of those treadmills that doesn't have, it just kind of goes as fast as you can go.
Yeah.
That's what this job feels like. And because I'm so mission motivated, I am sprinting, and you just get to see the results here. And again, we didn't even touch on the work that we're doing to support NASA. We didn't touch on, the work that we're doing to enable industrial applications. The R&D continues at the national laboratories. These are just the highlights. It's truly incredible.
We might have to turn you into our first guest that does a 3-part show. I don't want to be crazy, but we got to let you do your job. I mean, this is important stuff. We can't pull you into all this podcasting. Rian, fantastic. Thank you so much. We learned a ton. We knew we would. And come see us in Houston. Let us know how the broad energy community can help you. Everybody's very excited about all this.
Thank you for having me. It's really been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.